Okay, welcome. This is a tutorial on sidechain compression. Sidechain compression is when you want to compress one signal when the other one's coming in. So a common example of that is a kick drum and a bass line. You want the bass line to decrease a little bit in volume every time the kick drum comes in. And what I have here is a pretty simple demo track, I guess you could call it. Kick drum and a bass line. So let's hear what it sounds like without any compression whatsoever, and then it'll be clear what the problem is that we have to solve. So. So to my ears, the kick drum is kind of hard to hear. I mean, it's not hard to hear in these instances of silence of the bass line because then it's just the kick drum playing. But when we have the kick drum and bass line playing at the same time, the kick drum is kind of masked by the bass line and it's not punching through. There was also some clipping on the master volume, which is always bad, and that was happening when there was just too much bass, I would imagine. That was the responsible frequency for that. Yeah, you had the bass line and kick drum going at the same time, and it was just too much volume. So how do we solve that? Well, we can use Ableton stock compressor. So drag one of those onto the bass line. And if you look for a second, there don't seem to be any options for side chaining. And what you have to do is hit this little triangle, and that'll open up our other options, and we can hit sidechain. So what we're going to do is have the kick drum, the audio of the kick drum, come in to this compressor, and then that will tell it when and by how much to compress the bass line. So audio from is going to be the kick drum. If we, to just test what we just said, if we hit this little headphone icon, we can hear what's coming into the compressor. So if I solo the bass line, I should not hear the bass line, I should hear the kick drum. All right, all good. So let's turn that back off. Now, there are a fair amount of parameters here, but I'm only going to go over 4 of them because I think by adjusting only these 4, you can actually get pretty far and probably accomplish all that you want to. So we're going to do that. And those 4 are the threshold, this thing, the ratio, attack, and release. So what's the threshold? Well, let me mute these so I can talk while they're playing. So this level, that's the kick drum coming in. It's the incoming signal. And based on where I choose my threshold, compression may or may not be activated. It's only activated if the incoming signal goes beyond the threshold. So if I have it way up here, there's just no compression whatsoever. I need to choose it so that the kick drum comes in, it goes past the threshold, compression is activated, and then it goes down, back below the threshold, compression is off. Yeah, and you might ask how much compression is happening, and that is determined by a ratio. So the ratio is between the incoming signal, which is the kick drum, and the outgoing signal, which is the bass line. So for example, if I have the kick drum coming in at 2 decibels above the threshold, the compressor is only going to allow the bass line to go out with a 1 decibel increase. If I had it at 4:1, for example, and I had that kick drum come in at 2 decibels above the threshold again, and this time the bass line will only go out at a 0.5 decibel. So it's a more drastic compression. And this is understood pretty well visually with this graphic. Let's play it. This is our threshold, this circle point, and you see the bass line's volume. It's not continuing at the same steep slope. Now it's deafened a bit, And if we increase our ratio, you could see it even more. So it's coming in at a steady volume, and then it only is allowed to increase a tiny amount. And that goes all the way to infinity if you want. If I have a ratio of 1 to 1, then there's no compression whatsoever. You can see it just follows the path that it would have otherwise. Okay, so that's ratio. Next would be attack and release. So attack is the point at which compression begins after the incoming signal goes past the threshold. So my kick drum comes in, reaches the threshold, goes past, and now 2 milliseconds later, compression will begin. I can adjust that all the way to 1 second after it reaches the threshold. Release is sort of the other side of that. It's how long the compression lasts. So with these two chosen, the kick drum will come in, 37.3 milliseconds later the compression begins, and then it lasts for 323 milliseconds. When I first started using Ableton, I often neglected these two parameters naively. But I think they're actually really helpful in terms of like fitting the kick drum into the mix really nicely and positioning it correctly in terms of time. So yeah, don't ignore those. Okay, let's have really drastic values chosen and see what that sounds like, just to get a clear idea of what sidechain compression is. So that's way too much, at least in my opinion. It's pretty hard to hear the bass line at all, and you kind of just have a kick drum track, which is pretty boring. So you need to balance it out more. Let me see if I can do that now. That's better to my ear. The two are now, they can play at the same time, and they're sort of working off each other. There's room for both in the mix, which is what you want. Yeah, so I can also go over this parameter of EQ. EQ, what that does, it EQs the incoming signal. So my incoming signal is the kick drum, and what that's going to do in this case is low pass filter the kick drum. So let's turn on this headphone thing again. You can hear it's a very low pass version. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, a good example is if you have on this other track, you don't have just a kick drum, you have your entire drum loop. Like it's an audio file, and so you can't isolate the instruments, you can't take out the snare or the kick drum and tell the compressor to take the audio from the kick drum. You only have the whole drum loop. And so what I would do in that situation is use this EQ option and make it a very radical low pass filter so that the only incoming signal is going to be the kick drum, and then any other parts of the loop that have, a very low tail end. If you're lucky, that's only a bit of the snare, but there could be some ambient noise or anything that has like really low frequencies going on. But if you tweak it just right, then you can get it to have essentially only the kick drum coming in to the compressor, and then what you have is a sidechain compressor to the kick drum like you want it. So I think that's all I wanted to say on this. Sidechain compression can be used not only for bassline and kick drum. You could use it with any pair of instruments, for example, including vocals. So if you have the vocals come in and you want your guitar to go down because the vocals are really important in this stage of the song and the guitar is really loud, And so you don't want to have both playing at the same time. That's a common thing to do. I would say the bass line is almost always sidechain compressed to the kick, but of course there are no absolutes in music. Yeah, so that's the basic idea. Hope you enjoyed.